Hey everyone, welcome to today's episode of the Senstennial Podcast, and we're excited to welcome on special guest Jake Ferraro to the Senstennial Podcast, coming in from SenShot's, where he writes about the Ottawa Senators. Jake, thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Matt, for having me. I'm excited to talk hockey with basically anybody, whether you're from Canada, does not matter. I'm always excited to talk about hockey. Thank you guys for letting me come on.
Yeah, no worries at all. So we kind of want to kick off the show by asking you, you've been writing, you mentioned before the show, you've written about a few different teams in the league. So, how did you first get into writing about different hockey teams in the NHL, and how did the Ottawa Senators end up falling into your lap?
Yeah, so I was a student at Oklahoma State. I was a sports media major. I first went there in the fall of 2021. And originally, I went to school to become a broadcaster. But as I got there, I started falling in love with writing. So I took writing very, very serious. And in the summer of 2023, my first writing gig started. I was writing for the Dallas Stars at Wada Hockey. So I did that all throughout my final year at OSU. Did a couple of other things. I was writing for the Log Cabin Democrat in Conway, Arkansas, covering the University of Central Arkansas. And I'm currently still writing for the Black and Gold Banneret for the UCF Knights, University of Central Florida, for those in Canada that might not know. Also write for the Smoking Cuban blog for the Dallas Mavericks and Jay's Journal for the Toronto Blue Jays. So, got some other writing gigs, but the Sens gig came up. SenShot needed a person to take over for the site for the blog, and no one had written on the site at the time since June 2024. So I saw an opportunity in September to start writing and fell in love with it. And the Sens fans have been great. I don't know if anybody really knows me well on Twitter or the social media way, but in December 2024, I lost my mother, and the Sens fans were very, very supportive of me. And this past May, I announced I was getting professional help for the first time in my life, and the Sens fans were very supportive. So I don't know if I can't say thank you to everyone, but if anybody who's paid attention to me on social media, I say thank you very much for those two events from this past year.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that stuff with us. I know still like mental health is really stigmatized, so we always appreciate people being open about it, and we're the same way. So thanks for
Yeah,
sharing that.
absolutely.
Yeah, thanks again for coming on, Jake, and I think we'll kind of get going here by talking about what your thoughts on the playoffs were from a writer's perspective, and how do you think the Sens fared against the rival Toronto Maple Leafs?
They fared well. I mean, truthfully speaking, they gave the Maple Leafs a better series than I think most people expected. I think after when they lost game one by 6-2 or whatever it was, a lot of people thought the Leafs would sweep them, but Nick Cousins was inserted into the lineup for game two, and for the rest of the series he played. And anybody could say what they want. They were in five of those six games. The only bad game they played was game one. They were in five of the six games. The three games went into overtime. If they won one of the first two games in overtime that they lost, the series has a game seven, or maybe they win both games and they're up 3-1 and they beat them in Toronto in five. But at the end of the day, the season was still a success. No one expected that team to make the playoffs before the year started. And for the record, actually, 2 days before the season opener against Florida, I did predict the Sens would make the playoffs. So I got that bold take right. If anybody wants to go back, look back on October 8th. I predicted that they will make the playoffs. They did. It was fun. I was at two of the games. Unfortunately, I was at both games they lost, game 3 and 6. But the Sens fans were so supportive. Even during the handshake line, they were chanting Brady and they gave their team a loud ovation. You didn't quite see that from the Leafs fans when they lost to Florida, though. Not trying to start a frenzy, but the difference between the teams was phenomenal when the teams got eliminated at home.
Just have to make sure you don't see any Leafs fans coming to your door with pitchforks and torches.
I had a few in my comments and DMs. Don't worry, I'm not going to say who it was from.
No, but that's great. I think Matt, I can't remember if you and I both said they're making the playoffs. I know Bennett was
Oh
more of
yeah,
a.
we I think we've been saying that for the last 3 years. So it
We
finally
finally
panned
got it
out.
right.
They were due.
Yeah,
They were
Yeah,
due. Some teams are finally due. I just don't know when the Sabres are going to be due. That's for another story.
and you know what? Thankfully, the Sabres aren't our problem. So,
yeah.
but one player.
I told everyone when they traded Cousins that may have been a mistake. Cousins had more fun playing in Ottawa in a span of 2 months than he ever did playing in Buffalo. He said it was always a goal of his to play in Canada. You can tell he loves playing in Ottawa.
Yeah, and I'll love to see how he can build upon, he didn't have a great playoffs, but to finish the season with, I believe it was 16 points in 20 games, I'd love to see him carry that over to next season and hopefully generate some even better chemistry with the Sens. But the player who I wanted to focus on was another player that Ottawa acquired at the deadline, and that was Fabian Zetterlund. And you recently wrote about his contract extension, and you also mentioned that you don't believe that this eliminates him as being trade bait for the Ottawa Senators if they were to look at the trade market for potentially some top six or help up front or top four on the blue line. So, do you want to maybe get into detail about why you have those thoughts?
I thought it was a good trade at the time. I mean, Zetterlund had potential. He was part of the Timo Meier trade. Some Devil fans were not happy when they traded him to San Jose, but for being on a horrible Sharks team for the past 2 years, he was one of the few bright spots. He had 24 goals in 23-24, had 44 points that year to set career highs. The kid still has potential. He's 25 years old, and the 5 points in 20 games that he had in Ottawa after the trade, that can be concerning. But at the end of the day, he still has to learn a new system. He's got to get used to Travis Green's coaching. He's got to get used to playing with new teammates. And the kid's still got potential. He's 25 years old. I did agree with the 3-year contract. The 25-26 is his year to get used to the Ottawa system. But I did write a new piece about Green, or excuse me, Zetterlund, how he could become trade bait. Like, let's say the first year in Ottawa does not live up to the contract. In 2026-27, if he's still underperforming, Ottawa could look to trade him to try and dump the contract. Now, if that doesn't work out, if the Sens are still pushing for a playoff spot in 2028, or if the Sens are struggling in 2028, he's on expiring contract, that can make him worthy to trade for a better player at the deadline, or a team would be interested in trading for him to improve their playoff push. So I still like the kid. I still think he's got potential. I think a full year in Ottawa can give him some confidence. And the fact that they committed to him for 3 years shows that Staios does believe in him.
I think it also speaks volumes that at the deadline, there were a lot of reports that Staios called Greer 3-4 times about acquiring Zetterlund. And he kind of just broke him down finally and got the player that he wanted. And obviously, I think everybody's going to look at the stats that Zetterlund had once he was in Ottawa and say, they don't jump off the page, like you said. But I think the 24 goals last year, the 19 goals this year, there's potential for growth there. And quite frankly, you look at that Sharks lineup, and there's nothing really jumping off the page that can facilitate him taking that next step as a goal scorer. But once you introduce him to full-time Tim Stützle, I think that 20 goal consistency becomes potentially 30 goals, and he fills one of the open slots on the top six wing. So I can totally see your perspective. I think that Staios going that hard after him, I think he's going to do everything in his power to make sure it works out.
Yeah, at the end of the day, you're not going to trade a second rounder for a 25-year-old for him to be a 1-year rental or just sign him for a 1-year contract. You want him on board for more years than that.
Absolutely.
Now, when looking at Ottawa's roster, Matt just mentioned how Zetterlund could line up with Tim Stützle. Obviously, there's been a lot of trade talk. There's been rumors that Staios wants to make a splash. We've seen names like Jason Robertson out there, guys like JJ Peterka, who was formerly World Junior line mates with Tim Stützle. Rasmus Andersson apparently is a guy that the Sens have had on their radar. I know before the show, you and I were talking, Brock Boeser's name has been out there for a possible free agency target for the Sens. The Sens do have the first round pick this year. It is 21st overall. Is that something that they might dangle for some top six help or maybe a top four defenseman? What do you think about Ottawa's options there?
I think they can use that for a trade. I mean, Staios, he went aggressive at the deadline, getting Cozens, but the 21st overall pick, Moving forward, I think it's very obvious for Steos that he sees the vision of Ottawa being a consistent playoff team. So if you're a consistent playoff team, then giving up your first round pick to get a solid player isn't going to mean that much to you. The number one guy out there we still don't know is Jason Robertson. Dallas's cap situation is very poor, and I'm familiar with Jason Robertson because I wrote for the Stars, as I mentioned earlier. The kid's dynamic. I mean, he bursted on the scene in 22-23. He's had back-to-back 80-point seasons. It's just he's he's under contract for 25-26 at 7.75 million, and then the contract hits. And a lot of people think he could get $9-10 million, which he deserves, by the way, because if it wasn't for Robertson, Dallas wouldn't have been to the conference finals in each of the past 3 years. I think they can get him for a first round pick and maybe another player or two, maybe a couple of draft picks. But if Steos gets a big name player like a Robertson, or even sign a guy like Boeser, he's sending a message to the league that we're committed to winning. And the Sens fans have been wanting that for years. We're sick and tired of losing. And the most important thing, too, is you can't have 2025 be a one-year wonder and then miss the playoffs for another 2-3 years. So that's why trading or signing a player, a big name player like Boeser, Robertson, Andersson, sends a message to the league. We're committed to winning.
And speaking of committing to winning and having a culture of progression in the Sens locker room, we're going to have to talk about Claude Giroux, obviously.
Yes.
The most recent update is that, they're far apart in contract talks, mostly because of the bonus breakdown that Claude Lemieux, Jonathan Toews' agent, just got for Toews on his new contract with Winnipeg. And I think the Sens and Giroux are trying to hammer out a bonus-laden contract. But what do you think that kind of looks like? And what number do you say, I don't think we should be signing him to that?
I've had many talks about this with people outside of the Senators, just hockey fans in general. The reality of Claude Giroux is this. Each year he was in Ottawa, the point production dropped per year. He went from 79 to 64 to 50 this year at $6.5 million. I don't see Giroux no more than $4 million. And it's important for Steos to sit with Giroux and say, listen, we want you back, but we have to sign other players. We have to have money in place to re-sign Nick Cozens or re-sign Adam Gaudette, or think about Nick Jensen's contract running up next year, or 2 years down the road with Artem Zuber, some players like that. Like, Giroux has to understand he's not going to see that salary again. I personally don't think he will. And if the money is too high, it might be best to let him walk. If he does not re-sign, that opens up the door, like you mentioned about Brock Boeser. But I mean, it's just, you can't overpay for Giroux. He's going to be 38 years old. I don't know how many more years he has left in the league, like none of us do. But Giroux, it'd be good to see him back from a Sens fan standpoint. He loves it there, but you can't overpay for Giroux. Not when you have other players to re-sign, or it could be a blessing in disguise if he does walk, use that money to sign other players. And the Senators have under 11 million in cap space. I think the exact number is like 10.7. So if you give them 5.5, you lost a big chunk already. And that's something that Steos has to be careful about.
I feel like, we've obviously talked about Boeser, but does anybody else kind of feel like it's a bit of a buyer beware? He had that one really good season and
23-24. Yeah. And then this past year, well, Vancouver flopped completely. Vancouver won the division, then they missed the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't just Boeser, it was the team complete all around.
100%. I can just see that whoever signs him, I don't know if it's going to be a contract that ages that well.
He kind of reminds me of like a Mike Hoffman plus, like that guy who's maybe a slight tier above Mike Hoffman, but Mike Hoffman went to Florida, kind of lit it up there, and then had a down year. They traded him to the Blues. He continued to kind of diminish, went to the Habs, and that's kind of it. Like, there wasn't much for him. I kind of have the same feeling about Boeser. I don't think he's a bad player. It's just one of those guys who I feel like if he's looking for a long-term contract, that's really not going to age well. So I'm very wary of him. If
It's
Ottawa,
very similar. It's very similar to like two guys in Dallas, like Jamie Benn and Tyler saying because they earned their contracts. But if you look at the production they've had after their contracts, they've both had some rough years in Dallas. And now Dallas is in a position. It's like, what are they going to do with Jamie Benn now? Just like Vancouver, what are they going to do with Boeser? Even though, what was it? Boeser cleaned out his locker room after the game, or he said it was more than likely he wouldn't be back. But the point is, it's like you get in that position with your long-term players. It's like, well, what are you going to do? You're not going to see that money. Or if you do want to give him another long-term contract, you could be in trouble. I still think we're talking about former players like Matt Duchene, like he's now 4 years, $4.5 million. I think that's a mistake for Duchene for his age. And Besser's at that age where it's like you're going to be eating that contract like 4 years down the road where the production just drops dramatically.
yeah, and that's why if there's like a right wing on the market who I think the Sens should pursue, it would be Peterka. I think it's a mistake for Buffalo to be offering him up. But if
It
Ottawa
is.
can do that, then hey, you have the best German dynamic duo in the league.
Exactly.
Probably the
Not
only
only
one.
that, though, but there could be some deal fever there. They worked out the trade between Norris and Cozens. I mean, there could be some deal fever there. And Buffalo, it's just nobody knows what the vision is anymore because anytime Buffalo gets a solid player, he's gone. Eichel, Ullmark, Reinhart, they all go. And Peterka is right on his way out the door too, it seems. It's just we don't know what the vision is in Buffalo. And look, I wrote about Norris too. The Sens should be happy he's gone with the injury history. And not only that, though, this is a shocking stat. I don't know how many people know this, but with Norris in Buffalo, he's the highest paid forward on the roster. And he misses a significant amount of time per year, it seems. Like that's a major risk for the Sabres at $7.95 million.
Yeah, and I think that was, a huge reason why Steos traded Norris. But yeah, it's hard. I think from a locker room chemistry perspective, and of course the fan base was more or less depending on who you ask, but a lot of people I think felt attached to a player. And obviously with Steos coming in, I think you could start to tell that there was a shakeup coming to the core. It'd just be a matter of when and who. And it took until the deadline, but Norris was that who. And yeah, I mean, it'll be very interesting to see how Ottawa comes back next season. Trading for a guy at the deadline and trying, especially in a major position like your second line center, is quite a shakeup to make headed towards the playoffs. But we'll see if it pays off for them.
Well, here's one thing that's for certain. If Cozens wasn't on that team, I don't think that playoff push happens because Cozens made an impact immediately. It was the second game. It was against the Red Wings. It was the game Ullmark had like 50 saves or something like that, and he scored the go-ahead goal with 6 minutes left. I think that was the moment. It's like, all right, Cozens won over the fan base. I think that was the game.
That was even though he had the entire net to shoot at. Yeah, I was so thrilled for him. Like, I don't think he could have missed that shot if he tried, but I'm glad he nailed it because you're right. That was a very hype moment, and yeah,
I also thought he endeared himself to the fans in his first game against the Rangers. Sens
Yeah,
go down. Was it 2-0 or 3-0, and they make
it was
comeback?
2-0. It was 2-0 and 3-1. He had an assist. I think it was the goal to cut it to 3-2 or 3-3.
yeah, he had a
He had
pretty
an
But
assist
crucial
in
on
the
the
third
same
assist.
at the
period.
same time, uh, he had 9 hits that night.
He
Like
did.
he
That's
was
right.
just doing everything he possibly could, and just I think everybody loved that. And like the first time he touched the puck, the entire stadium was cheering for him. So I think I think he's going to be the type of guy that needs to settle into a new system because I just remember how good he was at the World Juniors, years ago, and feel like he can sort of replicate that at the NHL level. He's been a 30 goal guy in the league before, so I think he can get back to that if he's consistently playing with Drake Batherson.
I think so too. I mean, Cousins, he had less money than Norris. I think that was another reason why Steos was willing to move Norris because Cousins makes less money. And Cousins has had I think his career high was a 68-point season. And people forget that he was the seventh overall pick 6 years ago. People forget that. And he was another player who Buffalo looked to as to help turn the franchise around. It's just they didn't really put enough around him, and Buffalo's just been a disaster for since 2011. They've been a disaster.
Yeah. And on top of that, he's healthy.
Exactly, he's
I
a healthy
mean,
guy.
if you really think there's a disparity in player talent level between Norris and Cozens, the difference really is that Cozens plays and Norris doesn't. Like I loved Josh Norris. I was a Josh Norris truther. But the problem is that he had a lot of flaws in his game, and the biggest one being that you couldn't rely on him to not get hurt. So it's easier to just have a guy who you can plug in and more or less know he won't get hurt, as opposed to with Norris, you just hope and pray that he doesn't need a fourth shoulder surgery. So
Yeah.
All right, Jake, I have one more for you.
All right.
All right, you're in the Sens front office.
Okay.
All right. I love these fun hypotheticals. You get to make one move this offseason, keeping in mind the cap restraints and whatnot. What is that one move that you're doing, whether it's trade, free agency? What is that one move that you think continues Ottawa's, I guess, I want to say opening of their window, but I get a little scared of that wording. But you get what I mean, like to continue their playoff appearances.
Well, because I did write for the Stars, I think trading for Jason Robertson, you need the big name player. Like I said, I wouldn't touch Boeser. And at the end of the day, like you will still have Robo for under $8 million. And Boeser could demand more than $8 million this year. And depending on what Robo does, you could say we don't want you back. And the good thing is for Robertson, he's on a restricted contract, so that helps. It's not like he's unrestricted and you don't know his future. But I would say trading for Jason Robertson. I mean, I'm very familiar with Robertson's game. I got to see him a lot in Dallas, and me personally too. I know we didn't touch base on it, but the backup goaltender, I would not bring back Anton Forsberg. I would give Levi Merrillainen the confidence and trust, and call him up. He had an impressive 12-game stint, and not only that, but with the age he's at, I think being the backup for Linus Ullmark can help him grow and mature more, because it could be uncertain if Ullmark by age 3, or he's 31, 32, by age 34, if his play dwindles a little bit. But Merrillainen impressed very well throughout the 12-game stint in the NHL and in the AHL. I think the time could be now to have Levy be the full-time backup.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us. Thanks for your insight and your thoughts.
Absolutely.
Really appreciate it. Is there anything you want to plug before we call it a day?
Not that I can think of. Just looking forward to the draft and the off season. It's going to be an interesting one. But yes, Sens fans, I didn't actually say it earlier. I went to school at Oklahoma State, but I'm originally from New Jersey. But I've been up to Ottawa 4 times. I absolutely enjoy going up there. I actually got the Quebec flag shirt on. My fellow Pokes and Oklahomans were happy to see the Thunder win the chip, and Lugens Dort's from Montreal, so I guess I'm supporting him a little bit, and my fellow state too. But thank you guys again, and we'll see what happens in the off season.
Awesome. And for anybody who wants to follow Jake or his work with SenShot, I will make sure to link their social media accounts in the description. So thanks, Jake. Really appreciate your time, and we'll see you next time.
Absolutely. Au revoir.
Cheers.
thanks, Jake. Have a good one.